the owner nobody knew. The gate agent's voice cut across the terminal. She told him plainly that he had never belonged in first class, not for a single minute, and she said it loud enough that the entire boarding area turned to look. Security showed up within seconds. Nathan and the two officers said nothing as they walked him away from the jet bridge, his father's memorial service now hours out of reach. Nobody in that crowd spoke up for him. Nobody knew that the name stenciled on the side of that aircraft, and the $12 billion airline behind it, belonged to him entirely. So why did he stay quiet? Gerald Cole had built Cole Air out of a single lease turboprop and a rented hangar outside Maple Ridge. By the time he died, the company was worth more than $12 billion. The will ran 3 pages. Every share passed to his son, possible only because the airline had never sold a single share to anyone else. There was no press release, no photograph, no memo to the staff. The transfer moved through a holding company called Ashford Trust, and the name on the public filings belonged to an attorney in Delaware who had never met a single employee of the airline. Nathan Cole signed the papers in a conference room on a Tuesday and went home to an apartment with a dishwasher that had been broken for 2 months. He was 38. For the 12 years before that, he had worked at a regional carrier under his mother's maiden name, loading bags first, then dispatch, then running a station in Ohio, because his father believed a man who was going to inherit an airline should know what one smelled like at 4 in the morning. The lesson had stuck. So had the habit. He let the board run the company. He read every report they sent him and answered maybe 1 in 10. He owned all of it, and he walked through the airline's own gates 2 or 3 times a month without a single person recognizing him, which was no accident. It was the arrangement he had chosen, and for a year it had worked exactly as he wanted. There were reasons beyond preference. His father had spent his final 4 years cycling in and out of hospitals, and in that time the executive floor had learned to run without an owner in the room. Undoing that overnight would have broken things that were still working. So Nathan left the machine alone, watched the numbers, and told himself that a company with good numbers was being run well. It was the one lazy assumption he'd ever allowed himself, and it was about to cost him. Only 4 people knew his name: the chairman of the board, the head of internal audit, and 2 attorneys who didn't even work in the building. Everyone else across a workforce of 19,000 knew Cole Air the way anyone knows a large employer, as a logo, a schedule, a set of rules handed down from somewhere above them. The ticket. The memorial was set for 6 o'clock on the first Thursday in October, at the old hangar in Maple Ridge, 1 year since his father's death. The mechanics who'd worked the original fleet were coming in, most of them past 70 now. The plan was simple. Open the hangar doors, say a few words, hang a plaque with Gerald Cole's name on the north wall where the tool cribs used to sit. Nathan had exactly one job that day: be there. He booked the flight himself, from his own laptop, at 11 the night before. The direct was full. The connection through Denver was full. What was left was seat 2A on Cole Air Flight 2204 out of Harborview International, departing 8:40 in the morning. And it cost more than he'd spent on a ticket in any other week of his life. He bought it anyway. It was the last seat on the last aircraft that could get him to Maple Ridge before 6. The card he used was tied to Ashford Trust. He didn't think twice about it. He arrived at the airport at 6:50, wearing a gray jacket he'd owned for 9 years, jeans, and boots scuffed across the left toe. He carried one canvas bag holding a folded suit, a shaving kit, and a photograph in a wooden frame he meant to leave on the hangar wall beside the plaque. He drank a coffee standing up near a newsstand and watched his own airline move around him. Above the escalators hung a new banner in the airline's colors: Premier Guest Standards, recognizing the passengers who matter most. He read it twice. It wasn't language his father would have approved, and he made a mental note to ask about it later. One of 100 small notes he made in an average month. Gate 14 filled up early. Nathan sat by the window with the canvas bag between his feet, watching the ramp crew work the belt loader. When first-class boarding was called, he stood, walked to the podium, and held out his phone. The agent's name tag read Renee Foster, somewhere in her 30s, hair pinned back tight. She took his phone the way someone takes something they've already decided is a problem. She scanned it. The reader chimed green. She looked at the screen, then at him, then at the screen again. "This is a 2A, she said. "That's right. Do you have identification?" He handed over his driver's license. She held it under the light, and something crossed her face that was almost amusement. "Cole," she said. "Cute. You went with Cole." "It's my name." "Sure it is." She set the license face down on the counter beside the reader. Behind him, the line stopped moving. A man in a suit shifted his weight and checked his watch. Renee typed for a while. "The purchasing account on this reservation is a corporate account. Ashford Trust. That's not the name on your license, either. It's an account I'm authorized on." "That's not what I asked." She kept typing. "Sir, do you have the physical card used for this purchase?" He took out his wallet and set the card on the counter. She looked at it without touching it. "I'm going to need you to step aside while I verify this." He stepped aside. She waved the man in the suit through, then the next passenger, then the next, and each one glanced at him on the way past, because that's what people do. By 8:09, boarding for the main cabin had started. Nathan stood 4 feet from the podium, bag on his shoulder, saying nothing while 140 people filed past him onto an aircraft he owned. At 8:19, he tried again. "I've got a hard commitment on the other end," he said. "If there's a fare issue, charge me the difference and put me in the back. I'll take any seat on the plane." Renee looked up from her screen for the first time in 10 minutes, and something about the offer seemed to confirm whatever she'd already decided. "So you'll take any seat," she said. "Interesting. Because people who actually paid for 2A don't usually offer to sit in 31C. She said it at full volume, and it carried past the podium into the seating area. Heads turned. "Sir, I've been doing this job 6 years. Every few weeks somebody comes through this gate with a corporate card that isn't theirs and a story about authorization. They always want the good seat. And they always get real reasonable the second you push back. I'm not asking for the good seat. I'm asking to get on the plane. You're not getting on this plane." A woman near the front of the seating area raised her phone and held it low against her chest, angled toward the podium. Her name was Sarah Lindqvist, flying home to Maple Ridge to see her mother. She'd watched the last 4 minutes and something about it had turned her stomach, so she started recording. Renee picked up the handset and paged for a supervisor, talking the whole time she waited. Half to Nathan, half to the room, in the flat, cheerful register of someone who believes she's being watched approvingly. "This is what people don't understand about premium cabins," she said. "There's a standard. There's a reason it costs what it costs. You can't just walk up in whatever you happen to have on and expect a seat other people work their whole lives for." Nathan didn't answer. He watched the jet bridge door and the clock above it. Karen Whitfield arrived from the operations office 2 gates down, lanyard swinging. Renee met her halfway and spoke into her ear for maybe 15 seconds. Karen looked over at Nathan, took in the jacket, the boots, the canvas bag, and he watched a decision get made about him in under 2 seconds, by a woman who hadn't asked him a single question. "Sir," Karen said, "we're not able to board you today. Can you tell me what the actual issue is?" "The reservation's been flagged." "Flagged by who?" "I'm not able to discuss the details." The card cleared. The scan came up green. Your own reader said green. "Sir, I'm going to ask you to lower your voice." He hadn't raised it. Renee, standing behind her supervisor now with her arms crossed, delivered the line that would eventually play in front of 3,000 employees and then on every newscast in the country: "You were never entitled to first class. Not today, not ever. People like you don't belong in that cabin, and everyone standing here knows it." The gate area went silent. A man in a windbreaker looked at his shoes. A woman with a rolling bag turned toward the window. Sarah Lindqvist kept her phone up, hands shaking, and didn't stop recording. Karen didn't correct her employee. Didn't step in front of her, didn't lower the temperature, didn't apologize to the man standing 4 feet away with a bag on his shoulder. She checked her watch, glanced toward the jet bridge, and lifted her radio to call security, the whole exchange carrying the ordinary rhythm of a task being completed on schedule. Nathan Cole stood in a terminal with his family's name painted across the aircraft outside the window, a photograph of his father in the bag on his shoulder, and understood exactly how much power he held in that moment. 2 sentences. That was all it would take. A call to the chairman of his own board, and this woman would be walked off the property inside 10 minutes. He could be in seat 2A before the door closed. He could be standing in that hangar at 6 o'clock with a plaque and a photograph and the men who'd built the first fleet. He thought about it for the length of one long breath. Then he thought about the banner over the escalators. Recognizing the passengers who matter most. He thought about a gate agent who'd said what she said, in a crowded terminal, in company uniform, at full volume, in front of her supervisor, without lowering her voice, without checking who was listening. A person doing something they know is wrong looks around first. She hadn't looked around. She'd said it the way you state a policy, and her supervisor had stood beside her and said nothing. That was the part that stopped him. Not the insult, the comfort behind it. Renee Foster hadn't been afraid of consequences, which meant that in the building his father built, there weren't any, which meant this wasn't one woman having a bad morning. It was a temperature. The temperature of the whole room. If he ended it right now with a phone call, he'd fire one employee, learn nothing, and it would happen again next Thursday at a different gate to a man who didn't own the airline. He wanted to know how deep it went. He could only find that out from where he was standing, as the man being removed, because the second he became the owner in that room, everyone in it would start performing for him, and the truth would go underground for good. An owner gets shown a clean building. A passenger gets shown the real one. There was a cost, and he counted it while he stood there, the hangar, the plaque, the old men who'd driven in from 3 states. He was going to miss all of it, on purpose, and he understood his father would have called that the correct trade without hesitating. Marcus Bell from airport security came up the concourse with another officer behind him. Karen pointed at Nathan before Marcus had even finished walking. "Sir, I need you to come with me. I'm not refusing to leave. I still need you to come with me." Nathan picked up the bag, put the strap over his shoulder, and didn't argue. Didn't ask for a manager, a name, a complaint form. He walked between the 2 officers down the length of the boarding area, past the seats, past everyone who'd watched it happen and said nothing. Behind him, he heard Renee pick up the microphone and announce, bright-voiced, "Final boarding for Flight 2204. At the top of the escalator, he stopped and turned around once. The jet bridge door was closing. Through the glass he could see the winglet of the aircraft, his family's name painted along the fuselage in letters 4 feet high. Sarah Lindquist stopped recording, sat back down, and saved the file, sent it to herself twice, because her phone had lost things before, then wrote herself a note with the date, the gate number, and the 2 names she'd caught, Foster, and a supervisor whose badge she hadn't been close enough to read. Downstairs, Marcus walked him to the doors and let him go with a nod that had something apologetic in it. Nathan stepped out into the cold morning air at 8:41. His phone said the drive to Maple Ridge was 14 hours. The next available seat on any airline put him there Friday afternoon. There was no version of that day that ended with him in the hangar at 6. He called the number for the old hangar. A man named Frank, who'd run the sheet metal shop for 29 years, picked up on the 4th ring. Nathan told him he wasn't going to make it. Frank said they'd hold the plaque until he could come out and put it up himself, and that Gerald would have laughed himself sick over an airline that couldn't get his own son on a plane. Nathan said he probably would have. Then he stood at the curb with the bag at his feet and watched Flight 2204 climb out over the west end of the field. He didn't feel angry, which surprised him. What he felt was cold and very clear, the way he used to feel at 4 in the morning in Ohio, when a station went down and somebody had to decide what happened next. He opened his phone, scrolled to a contact he'd used exactly twice since his father died, and typed 4 words to Paula Simmons, who ran internal audit and reported to the board, not to operations. One of only 2 people inside the company who knew whose name stood behind Ashford Trust. "I need an audit." What the audit found. Paula called him back that afternoon from a stairwell at headquarters, because in 22 years of this work she'd learned that stairwells don't have cameras. Nathan gave her the date, the station, the gate, the flight number, 2 names. Then the only instruction that mattered: nothing goes through operations. Not one request, not one email that lands on that floor. If they find out this is running, everybody starts behaving, and I learn nothing. She asked what she was looking for. I don't know yet, he said. That's the point. Don't start with me. Start with everyone else this has happened to. He drove out to Maple Ridge that weekend, 14 hours in a rented sedan, and arrived Saturday afternoon, after everyone had gone home. Frank met him at the hangar with the plaque still in its box and a stepladder, and the two of them mounted it on the north wall where the tool cribs used to be. Nathan set the photograph on the ledge beneath it. Frank mentioned that Gerald used to walk the ticket counter at 6 in the morning and buy coffee for anyone who looked like they were having a bad day, and that half the reason people stayed at that company for 30 years was that the old man never once acted like he was better than the people who worked for him. Nathan drove back Sunday and never told Frank why he'd missed Thursday. The first thing Paula found was that Sarah Lindqvist had already filed a complaint, submitted at 4:12 that same afternoon, from her mother's kitchen, with a 2-minute 40-second video attached and a written statement naming Renee Foster and describing the supervisor she hadn't been able to identify. The case was opened at 4:14. It was closed at 6:01 that evening. The closing note ran one line: guest presentation concern. No service failure identified. No refund or credit warranted. The manager who entered it was named Greg Turner, and the file showed the video attachment had never been opened. Paula pulled every complaint at that station closed under the same code. There were 41 over the past 2 years. She widened the search system wide and stopped counting at 316. She sent Nathan the summary at 2 in the morning, and he read it sitting on the floor of his apartment, back against the couch. A retired diesel mechanic in a work jacket pulled from the priority line at a hub in the southeast and asked twice to prove he'd bought his own ticket. A woman in scrubs coming off a night shift told her upgrade had been processed in error and moved to the main cabin, while the seat she'd paid for sat empty the whole flight. A man traveling with a service animal questioned at the podium and boarded last. His complaint closed in 90 minutes with the identical code and the identical sentence. Different cities, different agents, identical language down to the punctuation, because somebody had written a template and pushed it out to every customer experience manager in the system, and they'd been using it like a rubber stamp. Paula interviewed 9 of those managers under audit authority, which meant they had to answer and couldn't tell their own supervisors they'd been questioned. Greg Turner was the 6th. He didn't deny closing the files. He seemed genuinely confused that anyone considered it a question. That's the code we're given, he said. If it's a presentation issue, it's not a service failure. Service failures move my numbers. Presentation concerns don't. Who decides which is which? Paula asked. The rubric decides. It's not a judgment call. That's the whole point of it. She asked what happened to a manager whose service failure numbers moved the wrong direction. He looked at her for a while before answering, and when he did, his voice had dropped. You don't get to that conversation twice. Nathan read the transcript twice and understood he'd been wrong about something for an entire year. He'd assumed the company was healthy because the numbers were healthy. The numbers were healthy because somebody had built a machine that made the ugly things disappear before they ever became numbers. The rubric had a name. Paula found it in the 3rd week, buried in a training package that had never once been sent to the board. The Premier Guest Standards program had launched 3 years earlier out of the office of Douglas Reyes, Executive Vice President of Commercial Operations, its stated purpose protecting the integrity of the premium cabin. The mechanism was a scoring sheet. Gate agents were trained to rate boarding passengers on a 5-point scale across 3 categories: attire, demeanor, and travel profile, before scanning a premium boarding pass. Attire was defined with sample photographs. Business dress scored a 5, casual outerwear and work boots scored a 2. Demeanor rewarded passengers who were, in the language of the training deck, comfortable in a premium environment. Travel profile pulled loyalty tier and lifetime spend. A passenger who scored below a set threshold triggered what the program called secondary fare verification, the polite name for what Renee Foster had done at Gate 14 for 31 minutes. The other half of the machine was the incentive. Agents were measured on a metric called premium cabin integrity, which counted verifications initiated and fare irregularities identified, and didn't count verifications that came back clean. No cost to being wrong. A bonus for being right. Real money, paid quarterly, posted on a leaderboard in the break room at every station in the system. Renee Foster's personnel file completed the picture. 6 years at the company. 2 years and 8 months earlier, 4 months after the program launched, she'd been formally counseled by Karen Whitfield for boarding a premium passenger without verification, a man in a fleece pullover whose fare turned out to be entirely legitimate. The counseling document was in her file. So was the corrective action plan that followed it. In the 2 years since, she'd climbed to the top of the Western region in premium cabin integrity. Her verification volume ran 3 times the station average. Her name had sat on the Harborview Breakroom leaderboard for 5 straight quarters, and her most recent review, written by her supervisor, praised her exceptional instincts for protecting the premium product. Nathan sat with that file a long time. He'd wanted to know whether the woman at Gate 14 was one bad employee. She wasn't. She was the best employee the system had measured. Exactly the way it had told her she'd be measured. Somebody had handed her a scoring sheet with photographs of work boots on it, hung a leaderboard on the wall, attached a check to it, and then, when she performed the job precisely as designed, let her say what she said in a crowded terminal without flinching, because she genuinely believed she was executing policy. She was. That was the thing. She was executing policy. The rot wasn't in the terminal. The terminal was the last inch of a pipe that ran all the way up to the executive floor, and every manager along its length had been paid to keep it flowing. Nathan called Harold Vance the next morning. The board chairman had known Gerald Cole for 34 years and Nathan since he was a kid loading bags in Ohio, and he listened to the whole thing without interrupting once. "How much of this does Douglas Reyes know?" "He wrote it," Vance said. "He presents it to us every quarter as a revenue protection initiative. It's in the deck." Nobody on that board ever asked what verification actually looks like at a gate, including you. Including me. The stage. The board had scheduled its strategy announcement for the second Thursday in November, and by then the machinery around it was already turning. Nathan let it keep turning. The event was billed as the largest internal gathering in company history. 3,000 employees in the main hall of the Harborview Convention Center, 16,000 more watching a live feed at stations across the system, 9 credentialed reporters roped off at the back with a camera platform behind them. Every senior officer would be on the floor. The program ran 90 minutes and closed with the announcement of the next chief executive. 2 board members had already told Douglas Reyes the job was his. He'd had a suit made for it. His name sat on the run sheet under a segment titled The Next Decade, and his team's slide package proposed expanding premier guest standards to every station in the network by the first quarter of the following year. The word he used in his summary paragraph was scale. The first half of the program was the recognition segment. 12 employees would be brought on stage from across the system, capped by Employee of the Year. A trophy, a $10,000 check, and a photo with the incoming chief executive. Renee Foster had been nominated by Karen Whitfield and confirmed by a selection committee that reviewed metrics. Nobody on that committee had ever met her. Her file showed 5 straight quarters atop a leaderboard, and the committee's citation said she exemplified the standard the company was building toward. She flew in the night before, in first class, on a company travel voucher. She had never been on a stage in her life. Paula Simmons finished the audit report that Monday. It ran 211 pages, its final section a list of 19 managers and 4 officers, ranked by the number of complaints each had closed under a code that hadn't existed before Douglas Reyes created it. Harold Vance received it and asked Nathan one question: did he want the board to handle it privately, in a conference room, the way these things were normally handled? Nathan said no. He said this had happened to hundreds of people, in public, in front of strangers, at podiums and counters in 14 states, and every one of them had been made small in a room full of witnesses who said nothing. He said that correction was going to happen in the same place the damage did. Vance asked what he needed. Change nothing on the run sheet. Don't warn Douglas. Don't warn the floor. When the recognition segment ends, give me the stage. The hall was full by 8:30 Thursday morning. House lights down at 9. Banners on both sides of the stage in the airline's colors, the same words that had hung over the escalators at Harborview 6 weeks earlier. The recognition segment ran 40 minutes. Ramp leads, dispatchers, a flight attendant who'd worked 32 years without missing a trip. 3,000 people applauding, loud in a room built to be loud. Renee Foster was called last. She walked out in a navy suit, hair pinned back the way she always wore it, took the trophy, thanked her supervisor and her station and the company, and said she'd learned to take real pride in protecting the standard. The room applauded her for 7 seconds. Douglas Reyes stood at the edge of the stage and clapped with his hands high where the cameras could see them, then went back to his seat in the front row 30 minutes from being named chief executive. The lights came up on the podium for the next segment. Harold Vance walked out and said that before the board addressed the next decade, the sole owner of Colair would like to say something to the company. There was a sound in that hall that wasn't quite silence, because 3,000 people shifting at once makes noise. Nobody in that room had ever heard those words used about a living person. The company had a board. The company had officers. Ownership was a line in a filing, an attorney's name in Delaware, and 19,000 people had built entire careers under it without ever once picturing a face behind it. Nathan Cole walked out from the wing in a gray jacket he'd owned for 9 years. He was halfway to the podium before the noise started at the back of the hall, where a woman from customer relations had seen a copy of the video that month, and had moved forward through the room in a wave. By the time it reached the front rows, Renee Foster was still holding her trophy with both hands. She stood up. She sat back down. Her supervisor, 3 seats away, had gone the color of paper. Nathan reached the podium, set a single folder on it, and didn't open it. 6 weeks ago, he said, I tried to board Flight 2204 at Harborview International with a first-class ticket I paid for myself. I was refused at the gate for 31 minutes and then escorted out of the terminal by security in front of roughly 200 people. I was told I had never been entitled to that cabin, and that people like me do not belong in it. He nodded once toward a technician at the side of the stage. The screens behind him cut to black, then to a shaky vertical video shot from the 4th row at gate 14. 3,000 people watched it end to end. When Renee Foster's voice came through the house speakers at full volume, in a room that held every officer of the company and 9 reporters, the sound that moved through the crowd was something Nathan had never heard from a room that size before. He let the screen go dark before he spoke again. I could have ended that in 10 seconds with a phone call, he said. I didn't, because I wanted to know whether it was one person. It is not one person. The screens filled with the cover page of a 211-page audit report, then the number 316, then a photograph from a training deck showing a pair of work boots scored 2 out of 5. That scoring sheet was written on the 11th floor of our own headquarters, and paid for out of a bonus pool, he said. The woman at that gate did exactly what this company trained her to do, rewarded her for doing, and put her name on a leaderboard for doing. She is responsible for what she said. She is not the author of it. He looked toward the front row, at the man in the suit made for a different morning. Douglas, you're relieved of your position, effective now. Security will walk you out through the front, past the people whose work you were measuring. Douglas Reyes rose halfway out of his seat, said something nobody more than 4 feet away could hear. 2 corporate security officers were already standing at the end of his row. Nathan turned to the other side of the front section. Ms. Foster, your employment with Colair is terminated as of this morning. You'll leave the trophy on the seat. Then he looked out at 3,000 people sitting under banners that read recognizing the passengers who matter most, and said the one sentence every one of them would repeat that night. My father started this airline on the idea that everybody who walks up to our counter is somebody. He paused. We took that, and we wrote a rubric to sort them. Every one of us in this room has been living off that, including me. The footage was on 3 national broadcasts before the hall emptied. The reporters at the back had come for a CEO announcement. What they left with was video of an owner nobody had known existed, a 211-page audit, and a training slide that scored a pair of work boots at 2 out of 5. The fallout. By 4 that afternoon, the story had left the business section and led every newscast in the country. The first wave was about the humiliation. The second, which started roughly 30 hours later and did far more damage, was about the rubric itself. 2 competing airlines issued statements within a day confirming they had no comparable program, which put every carrier's practices in play and left Cold Air standing alone in front of a conversation that now spanned the whole industry. A congressional subcommittee announced it would take testimony on discriminatory treatment in commercial aviation. A federal transportation agency opened a review of the airline's complaint handling and requested 3 years of case files. Bookings fell 9% inside 9 days. 2 of the company's 5 largest corporate travel contracts suspended new bookings pending review, and the agency that rated the airline's debt put it on negative watch. The first serious meeting happened the following Sunday, in a conference room at headquarters with the blinds down and 14 people at the table. Outside counsel was blunt: the audit had been produced under attorney direction, which made it privileged, which gave the company a defensible legal basis for never releasing another page of it. What had gone out from the stage was already out, everything else could stay sealed, and his recommendation was that it should. The head of communications agreed and had already built a plan around it: a short statement of regret, 1 executive gone, 1 employee already terminated, a commitment to review policy, 90 days of quiet, and the story would be replaced by another story, because they always were. The chief financial officer put a number on the alternative. 316 identified passengers, most of whom had never been told the company had confirmed what happened to them. Publishing the report handed every one of them a documented claim and invited the class action that would follow. His estimate ran into the hundreds of millions before legal costs, and he said, without any particular cruelty, that no company in America would choose that voluntarily. Harold Vance let all of it be said, then turned to the end of the table, where Nathan Cole had been sitting silent for 40 minutes. 2 board members had been pushing the same line since Thursday night, and in almost any other company their argument would have won. The point had been made. The guilty parties were gone. 19,000 jobs depended on a brand that couldn't survive 6 more months as the industry's cautionary tale. Nathan understood the arithmetic and didn't dispute it. What he kept coming back to was Greg Turner in the audit transcript, saying he'd closed the file because that was the code he'd been given, without any sense that he'd done something wrong. Turner hadn't been a cruel man. He'd been a man inside a system where the ugly thing had a code, and the code made it disappear. Sealing the report was the same move, in a nicer room. If he did it, everything he'd said from that stage was a performance, and the company would learn the lesson it had already learned 316 times, that the correct response to getting caught is to close the file quietly. If we seal it, Nathan said, then the thing I fired Douglas Reyes for is the thing we're doing in this room. Counsel started to explain the distinction. Nathan let him finish. I hear you, he said. You're right about the exposure, and I'm not pretending the number isn't real. But I spent a year believing this company was healthy because nobody ever sent me anything that said otherwise. That happened because we built a machine for not sending things. I'm not going to fix that machine by using it one more time. Communications asked what he intended to release. All of it. 211 pages, unredacted except for passenger names. Every complaint code, every closing entry, every manager on that list. And we contact all 316 of those people directly before it goes public, because they shouldn't find out from a broadcast. The CFO asked whether he understood he was funding the lawsuits against himself. I understand I owe them a settlement whether or not a court makes me pay one. The board convened the next morning. Vance opened by noting for the record that no vote was actually required. There were no outside shareholders, there was one owner, the owner had already decided, and everyone in the room served at his discretion. Nathan asked for the vote anyway. Vance asked why, since he could simply give the instruction and be done by lunch. Because an instruction lasts exactly as long as I do, Nathan said. If I hand it down, transparency is my personal preference, and the next owner reverses it in an afternoon. If this board votes for it, it belongs to the company. One of the two members pushing to seal the report asked the obvious question, what would Nathan do if the vote went against him? I'd release it anyway. And then I'd know something about this board I don't currently know. It carried by 2 votes. What came after? The report went out on a Wednesday morning at 7, posted in full on the company's own site, no embargo, no spin. Every passenger in the file had been reached in the 8 days before, each told exactly what had been documented in their case, who had closed it, and what the company intended to do about it. Paula Simmons's team made those calls personally, on Nathan's instruction. He made 41 of them himself. The first was to the retired diesel mechanic in the Southeast, who'd been asked twice to prove he'd paid for his own ticket. The man didn't want money. He wanted to know if anyone had actually read his complaint at the time. Nathan told him the truth, that nobody had opened it, and the file had been closed in under 2 hours by a manager working off a template. The man was quiet for a while, then said he'd spent 30 years around engines, had always liked this airline, and that this was the first time anyone from it had spoken to him like a person. Nathan wrote that sentence down and kept it. Sarah Lindqvist got a call too. She hadn't asked for anything, hadn't sold the video, hadn't spoken to a single reporter. She was offered a role in the company's new customer advocacy office and took it. The first thing she did in that job was rewrite the intake form so that a complaint with video attached couldn't be closed until someone had actually opened the file. The rebuild took most of a year, and it started with the thing that had caused all of it. Premier Guest Standards was eliminated in its entirety the following Monday, not revised, not renamed, not scaled down into a smaller version of itself. The scoring sheet was pulled from every training package in the system. The sample photographs were destroyed. Premium cabin integrity came out of every gate agent's compensation plan at every station. The leaderboards came down that same week. In about half the break rooms, the agents took them down themselves before anyone from headquarters even arrived. The bonus pool that had funded the program survived. Nathan redirected it to a metric that measured how many passengers a station had actually helped solve a problem, harder to measure, much harder to game, and told operations that if a number ever looked suspiciously clean, he'd assume it had been manufactured and audit the station personally. Verification of a premium boarding pass was reduced to what it always should have been. If the scan came up green, the passenger boarded. If the system flagged a genuine payment failure, a supervisor resolved it away from the podium, out of public earshot. And under no circumstance could a passenger's appearance, clothing, demeanor, or manner of speech factor into any decision about their travel, a sentence that went into the operations manual as its own numbered section. All 19,000 employees went through a new training program over the following 8 months, and it wasn't the kind people click through. It ran a full day. It opened with the video from Gate 14, played without commentary, followed by audio from the audit interviews, in which managers explained, in flat professional language, how a complaint became a code, and a code became nothing. The last hour had no slides at all. Passengers who'd been on the receiving end of the rubric sat at the front of the room and described what those minutes at a podium had actually felt like. One of them, at a dozen sessions across the Western region, was the retired mechanic. The whole program closed on a single line, printed on nothing, sold under no logo. Every passenger who walks up to the counter gets the same respect, and it is not conditional on what they're wearing or what they spent. The people who had covered for it were handled the way the rules said to handle them, slower and less satisfying than the stage had been. 19 managers and 4 officers went through a formal review with representation, documentation, and a written finding in every case. 9 were terminated. 7 were demoted out of any role with authority over customer decisions. 7 kept their jobs, with findings noted in their files, because the record showed they had objected in writing and been overruled. A purge that swept up the people who tried to do right would only have taught the workforce that speaking up was the dangerous option.